Today's lecture is not about how to choose a good man. That is the wrong question, and asking the wrong question is often where life quietly begins to collapse. This talk is for women in their 40s who are standing at a threshold. Some of you have already lived through marriage once. Some of you are navigating loneliness, responsibility, and uncertainty at the same time. Some of you carry not only your own life, but children, assets, reputation, and a fragile sense of emotional stability. And so let us begin with a more precise definition. Remarriage in your 40s is not romance. It is not an extension of dating. It is a structural redesign of your life. In your 20s, marriage is largely emotional speculation. In your 40s, it is a multivariable equation where assets, children, credit, social identity, psychological patterns, and risk exposure all intersect. Yet despite this complexity, people still ask a dangerously simplistic question. What is a good man? But a more fundamental, more strategic question is this: what must you absolutely avoid? What signals can you not afford to ignore? Because the real competency required in midlife relationships is not ideal selection. It is early risk detection and structural response capability. And here lies the central problem. High-risk individuals do not present themselves as threats in the beginning. They often appear kind, attentive, even deeply considerate. But what you are seeing is not the structure. It is the surface interface. Given enough time, the underlying architecture emerges. Control, dependency, aggression, or parasitic alignment. And by then, the cost of exit is exponentially higher. Let me clarify 3 critical perceptual errors that repeatedly lead to structural failure. First, confusing control with care. When someone says, "I worry because I love you," you must analyze the operational meaning of that statement. Does it expand your autonomy, or does it reduce it? Control often enters quietly, disguised as affection, but over time it evolves into surveillance. Second, confusing sympathy with trust. A compelling victim narrative can open emotional access, but emotional access is not the same as verified integrity. When someone consistently externalizes blame, former partners, failed businesses, bad timing, you are not witnessing misfortune. You are witnessing a pattern of responsibility avoidance. Third, placing emotion above contract. Love is not a legal framework. Assets, ownership, guarantees, and accounts. These are not emotional symbols. They are enforceable structures. When emotion overrides structure, you do not create intimacy. You create vulnerability. So what should you do instead? You begin with boundaries. Not vague intentions, but explicit lines. Your privacy, your finances, your relationships. These must be clearly defined, not negotiated under emotional pressure. Next, you observe. Not words, but behavioral patterns over time. 6 months is not a long time. It is the minimum threshold to detect structural consistency. Anything less is still within the realm of performance. Then you verify past relationships, financial history, business outcomes, debt exposure, not through stories, but through evidence. Because in midlife, trust is not built through empathy alone. It is constructed through validation. At this point, I want to introduce a philosophical lens. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, there's a concept known as the bardo, an intermediate state in which the human mind, after death, encounters visions. But these visions are not external realities. They are projections constructed from one's own attachments and fears. And here is the critical insight. The mind mistakes its own projections for destiny. This is not just a metaphysical claim. It is a psychological one. Because the same phenomenon occurs in relationships. Loneliness creates projection. Fear creates projection. Compassion creates projection. And those projections are often mislabeled as fate. But if you are not conscious, you will not choose a new future. You will choose a familiar wound. Remarriage, therefore, is not a question of love. It is a question of consciousness. Not how deeply you feel, but how clearly you see. This lecture is not designed to make you suspicious of others. It is designed to make you aware of yourself, your patterns, your blind spots, your unconscious biases, because without that awareness, you are not choosing a partner. You are repeating a structure. Now we move into the analytical core of this lecture. We will systematically dissect recurring male archetypes that appear in the remarriage landscape for women in their 40s, not from a place of judgment, but from a structural and behavioral analysis. And more importantly, we will examine practical, real-world response strategies for each type, because insight without strategy is useless, and awareness without action is simply another illusion. Let us begin. In the previous section, we established a critical premise. Remarriage is not about finding the right person. It is about seeing clearly what must be avoided. We explored how risk does not appear as danger in the beginning, but as familiarity, warmth, and emotional resonance. Now, let us move one layer deeper, because among all high-risk relational archetypes, there is one that is particularly deceptive, not because it is aggressive, but because it appears wounded. Today we examine what I call the professional victim. At first glance, this man does not intimidate you. He does not control you overtly. He does not demand authority. Instead, he evokes something far more powerful, your compassion. And that is precisely where the structure begins. Let us analyze his psychological architecture. The first defining trait is this: I have always been the victim. This is not a statement, it is an identity. This man reconstructs his entire past through a narrative of injustice. Regardless of what actually happened, he positions himself as the one who was wronged. For example, a marriage may have ended due to his financial irresponsibility, but his version is different. My ex-wife didn't understand me. Notice what is absent: accountability. Or consider his professional history. Repeated job loss becomes, in his narrative, a story of persecution. My boss was jealous of me. Again, what is missing is not information. It is self-recognition. And when he approaches a new partner, he often says something like, I gave everything and I was abandoned. This is not disclosure. It is emotional positioning, because victimhood, when performed consistently, becomes a powerful tool to access sympathy. The second structural feature is chronic responsibility avoidance. This individual does not locate problems within himself. He externalizes them. Debt becomes someone else's fault. Broken relationships become someone else's manipulation. Conflict becomes someone else's sensitivity. If his children are distant, it is because they were turned against him. If financial instability persists, it is because others failed him. And if conflict arises after remarriage, you will hear a familiar sentence: you're just like my ex. This is not conflict resolution. It is pattern repetition, because without ownership, there is no learning. And without learning, there is only recurrence. The third feature is excessive self-pity. Now, self-pity in itself is not pathological. It can be a temporary emotional response. But here it becomes identity. Even minor disagreements escalate into existential despair. Why does this always happen to me? And this is not accidental. It induces guilt. When he seeks financial support, he frames it as survival. I've had such a hard life. And when you express your own struggles, he does not meet you there. He redirects the emotional center back to himself. This is not empathy. It is emotional monopolization. The fourth feature is habitual blame. Blame is the fastest way to avoid self-examination. Business failure becomes bad timing. Relationship conflict becomes your sensitivity. Broken friendships become their betrayal. What you are witnessing is not analysis. It is psychological equilibrium maintenance. Blame allows him to remain unchanged. Now, let us step into a philosophical framework. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, there is a profound idea. After death, consciousness enters an intermediate state, the bardo, where it encounters visions shaped by its own attachments and ignorance. And if it does not recognize them as projections, it follows them into another cycle. This is not just about death. It is about pattern, because what is not seen is repeated. The professional victim lives inside such a structure. Let me break it down into 3 deeper layers. First, unconscious attachment to deficiency. This man does not simply lack financial or emotional stability. He experiences that lack as a threat to his existence. At his core is a silent belief: I cannot survive alone. And instead of developing capacity, he develops dependency strategies. Second, karmic repetition of learned patterns. If in early life he was overprotected, rescued from consequences, or never required to take responsibility, he may internalize a dangerous assumption: someone will always take care of me. And so, in adulthood, he does not seek a partner. He seeks a protector. Third, victim identity as a defense system. In the philosophical language of the bardo, attachment to identity creates illusion. If he lets go of the identity, I am a victim, he must face responsibility. But if he maintains it, he gains 3 advantages. He avoids accountability. He justifies dependency. He claims moral superiority. In this sense, victimhood is not weakness. It is strategy. Now understand this clearly. This man is not necessarily evil. More often, he is the result of fear solidified into personality. But when immaturity becomes pattern, it produces real damage: emotional, financial, and structural. So what happens if you marry this type? The answer is simple and predictable. At the first sign of conflict, you will be reassigned from partner to perpetrator. Because in his narrative, there must always be a victim. And if it is no longer his past, it will become you. So how do you respond? Let us move from insight to strategy. First, verify the objectivity of his past narrative. Do not listen only for emotion. Listen for structure. Can he describe specific events, including his own actions, or does he remain vague, general, and self-exonerating? Ask one critical question: what did you do in that situation? If he cannot answer clearly, you are not hearing truth. You are hearing defense. Second test for responsibility acknowledgement. Real change begins with ownership. Does he ever say, I was wrong. I handled that poorly. That was my responsibility. Not as a performance, but as a consistent pattern. And more importantly, has his behavior changed since then? Because words signal intention. Behavior proves transformation. Third, evaluate reflective capacity during conflict. Conflict reveals structure. After an argument, does he return to the conversation with self-awareness? Or does he escalate, deflect, and resurrect past grievances? When you offer feedback, does he consider it or attack you for giving it? Reflection is not a personality trait. It is a predictor of relational safety. Now, let us return to the central philosophical warning. The Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches one essential command: remain awake. Because if consciousness is not awake, it does not move toward truth. It moves toward familiarity. And relationships follow the same law. If you do not verify, You will believe not the person, but your loneliness. If you do not examine, you will choose not reality, but hopeful illusion. If you do not evaluate, you will create not change, but repetition. We have now examined multiple high-risk archetypes: the controlling type, the violent type, the addicted type, the financially parasitic type, and the professional victim. And they all share one defining characteristic. They do not appear dangerous at first, because collapse in relationships is never sudden. It is constructed, one ignored signal at a time. So the real question is not only, who is he? But also, why am I drawn to him? Why did I minimize that signal? Why did I prioritize emotion over structure? Why did I recognize but not act? Because failure in remarriage is not only about the other person. It is about the interaction between their pattern and your selection mechanism. This brings us to the next stage of our work. In the next lecture, we will not analyze men. We will analyze you. We will examine why the human mind repeats familiar pain, how loneliness distorts perception, and why the brain often chooses familiarity over safety. Because remarriage is not simply choosing a partner. It is confronting your past and deciding whether to repeat it. Only awareness can break repetition. Love is not destiny. It is judgment. And judgment can be trained. If this lecture has been valuable to you, I invite you to subscribe, like, and share so that more women navigating midlife relationships can choose not through emotion alone, but through clarity of consciousness. In the next episode, we face the most difficult question of all. Why did I choose him? I will see you there.